Capitol Report is a production of Senate Media Services.
A fix to the law change that impacted the work of some school resource officers is moving through the Senate. This week, key lawmakers weigh in, and high school students offer their views to policymakers. Stay tuned for this and more on this week's Capitol Report. Welcome to this week's program. I'm Shannon Lurkey. The 2023 legislature passed a law prohibiting school employees, including school resource officers, from using certain kinds of restraints on students, prompting much confusion and, in some cases, the withdrawal of school resource officers from schools. Senator Bonnie Westland is sponsoring a bill that will clarify the law, and she joins me now. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Some are calling for no change or simply a repeal of the language that was enacted last year. Why is this not an option?
Well, and I will say that those are probably two very different groups who want those things. So there are those who just want to repeal the work that we did last year, and there are those who think the current language is fine. In conversation with some of my colleagues and certainly extensive conversations with stakeholders, what I discovered is that SROs, school resource officers, have all been sort of creatures of contract, if you will. So every single school district would contract with their local law enforcement agency if they chose to have an SRO. And I will tell you from reviewing those contracts, there was a lot of variability. Some of them required training, some of them required no training, some of them were very sparse in terms of the details. And what we're doing is sort of building on the work that we did last year. And it should, I would say, for absolute clarity, the current language before my bill does not ban prone restraints, and I think there's a lot of misconceptions about that. The challenge came in how the bill was structured last year and how the statute is structured. So SROs were going to put into that educational statute rather than in the law enforcement and the criminal statute. And so what this bill will do actually will provide that clarity. It provides uniformity of training and a model policy that I think actually is far better, first and foremost, for our students.
And we'll get to the model policy in a moment. You told the Education Policy Committee that nobody is getting what they want in this bill. And you've already mentioned some of the stakeholders. There's law enforcement, there's student advocates, there's educators, there's parents. There are other interest groups that all have varying points of view. So how are you weighing all of those different things?
Yeah, and I think what you meant to say was nobody got everything that they wanted. So I wanted to be really, I think you said nobody got anything.
Oh,
nobody got, no, but I was like, I want to make sure we clarify that. So I'm a family law attorney. I do a lot of mediation, and anytime you're negotiating something with especially multiple groups of people or individuals, the idea is to try to get to a compromise that basically everyone can live with, recognizing the fact that nobody is probably going to get 100% of what it is they're looking for. And so in conjunction with members of the other body and the administration, DPS, MDE, we configured a working group that wanted to try to address this issue. And we took a comprehensive approach to it. We absolutely looked at how can we bring in stakeholders who may have different perspectives on this issue. So law enforcement perspective is really important. We wanted to understand their perspective. The education management folks, the school districts, the administrators, their perspective, really important. Education Minnesota represents the teachers. Their perspective is important. And then we also brought in Solutions Not Suspensions, which is a consortium of groups and individuals who are kind of community advocacy groups. And each one of them has a really interesting and unique, valuable viewpoint. So I think when you put together a bill like this, you're trying to sort of balance those interests so long as they serve the purpose of the bill. And I think that is the needle we've been trying to thread, and I think we've done it.
Senator Steve Swedzinski, who is chair of the Education Policy Committee that first heard this bill, said that he's never encountered so many different definitions of words like imminent, reasonable, and shall versus must. And there's more than that, but those are the ones he mentioned. Does this bill clarify what these terms mean?
I think it does. So I agree that we get lawyers involved and sometimes we mean different things, but specifically with the word imminent, that was in the statute. And the problem is, how can a school administrator or teacher it is a legal term really, and how are they going to assess in the moment, is this imminent harm or not? And so that also matched that language up with the paragraph that follows it. The shall versus may, from our standpoint, in the duties part of this, having shall in there was important, again, to have uniformity so that when contracts are being developed between the local school board or school district and the law enforcement agency, there are minimum things that have to be in the contract, and they can always have more. And so the long answer to your question is, I do believe that this bill actually does provide significant clarity around things like training, the topics that should be covered in the training. It covers a model policy, and our law enforcement officers deal with model policies all the time.
And so let's go into the model policy, because your bill would direct the Post Board, which is the Peace Officer Standards and Training Board, to develop that model policy, and then it would be a mandatory uniform policy statewide. Topics to be covered include the proper use of force, conflict de-escalation, alternative procedures that can be used to help people in crisis, how to build relationships, and more. Why a statewide? I mean, I think I know the answer, but why the statewide policy? Why one model policy?
Sure, and again, this is the minimum. And so looking at a lot of contracts, some contracts did include these sorts of things and some did not. And I think if we're looking for clarity for a law enforcement officer operating in the school, I would say that's qualitatively different. It's a different environment and a different purpose than maybe a patrol officer in the community. Everybody else in that school has had training on how to de-escalate, how to assist students who may be having, mental health crises and so on. And I think it's important that everyone in that school setting has that sort of level set of what needs to happen in the school. First and foremost, these are institutions of learning, and I'm of the opinion everyone in there is there to support our kids, and I believe the SROs are also. They are valued members of the team at our schools, and so I just feel like this model policy is part of that, and again, helps them develop the skill sets and also to have just clarity about what they are accountable to and for.
And so just briefly, the bill specifically outlines the duties then of a school resource officer. Why be specific about that?
Yeah, and it's not an exhaustive list. Again, it's sort of a bare minimum that contracts should include. What it is really is it's a job description. And I think everybody can relate to the fact that there's a job description. And looking again at contracts, we found that there were some common themes or common items that were already in there. So again, I think it is the minimum, and communities and schools and law enforcement can develop their contracts to go over and above that. But I think setting a floor was a good idea.
And since I have you here, I want to ask you about one other thing. You are also sponsoring a bill that would expand the crime of doxing, which is when someone disseminates private or identifying information on the internet. The expansion would include doxing a cell number or a personal email address, the name or photographs of an official's minor child or children. Is this a preemptive move, or has some of this already happened?
So we do know that election officials have experienced, I guess you would call it aggression, even stalking in some cases here in our state. We heard testimony about that last year when the bill came up. We know that this is also something that's unfortunately become more common across the country. And this was looking at sort of what other states do and sort of where their protections lie. This just makes it a little bit more robust without going sort of over the line, but I think protecting minor children of law enforcement and election officials and volunteers is really important, because unfortunately in this age of social media in particular, people can very quickly create a situation that is actually dangerous for our election officials and our law enforcement officers.
And then this is an election year, so presumably having greater protections then would help those people who serve in the elections to feel more comfortable?
Right, and I do think that we have seen that there's been people who are leaving sort of serving in elections, and some of that is because a lot of our election judges tend to be senior citizens who maybe are just aging out of that. We do have student election judges, and we're trying to encourage our students to come in and do this so we can build the next generation. But I also think that people are hearing news stories about things that have happened, and it concerns them. And again, we have had incidents here in the state of Minnesota that I think raise some concern. So we want to do everything we can to try and protect people.
Senator Bonnie Westland, thank you for joining me today. It was a pleasure.
Thank you so much. I enjoyed being here.
A bipartisan coalition of lawmakers and advocates called a press conference to call for policy changes to improve access to affordable housing.
So many people in the state of Minnesota don't have the ability to buy a piece of property that allows them to build that generational wealth, to plug into their community, to add to their community, have their community add into their lives. We are 106,000 houses behind right now in the state of Minnesota. The status quo has put us where we are. So the status quo needs to be changed.
When I've been out in my community, I hear so often, I've lived here for 30 years, for 40 years, but I couldn't afford my house today. Or my kids can't afford to live here. Or I work here and can't afford to live here. As has been said, we have a housing crisis in Minnesota, so we need to build a lot more.
There's a lot of shame around, growing up with housing instability, of being homeless in our own homelands. And I know that my story is your story, like too many Minnesotans who have struggled growing up, struggling for housing. And little did I know that growing up in the most disinvested neighborhood was actually by design.
Part of what we're trying to do here, in addition to making it more affordable and more accessible, is look at how we're building. Can we build in more efficient ways that the initial costs are lower and the initial impact to the environment is lower, but also that we're making more energy efficient units as well, putting them closer to transportation, doing other things that will reduce our impacts and our footprint as we go forward.
And members of the Reproductive Freedom Caucus outlined their legislative priorities.
We envision a future for Minnesota in which everyone, without exception, can shape and realize their reproductive future and destiny for themselves and with support and empowerment of the government, but without its interference.
Unfortunately, the way Black women are treated related to their reproductive health care and options leaves much to be desired. These disparities are linked to systemic racism and implicit bias, which contribute to higher maternal mortality rates among Black women. Black women are 3 times more likely than white women to die from pregnancy-related complications and face barriers to accessing quality postnatal care.
Myself and my co-author in the House, Representative Zach Stevenson, have introduced the Abortion Coverage Act because we also believe that people should be able to use the health insurance that they are paying for. The bill is very simple. I require that health plans cover abortion care should someone need that care. The fact that some plans cover abortion services and some don't is part of a pattern of discrimination and politicizing of health care.
The Reproductive Freedom Caucus is committed to full reproductive and gender freedom and bodily autonomy for all.
A law passed during the 2023 legislative session created confusion among law enforcement and school officials, resulting in some school resource officers being pulled from schools. Now that the legislature is back in session, lawmakers are working to clarify the law. Joining me is the person who initially flagged some concerns with the law change, the lead Republican of the Senate Education Policy Committee, Senator Zach Duckworth. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
The law change last session grew out of a 2015 law that prohibited prone restraints from being used on students with disabilities. The new law extended that prohibition to all students. Generally speaking, what is the problem with this law as you see it?
Sure. First off, I appreciate the question. Obviously, it's a very topic at the Capitol right now. It's getting a lot of attention, and people have a lot of questions about it. The law that passed in regards to our special education students was a no-brainer, right? We want to protect those kids. We want to protect all kids, but there also has to be a balance between our need to protect children and also keep them and our schools safe in general. And school resource officers play a large part in that in the schools that they're in. The law that was passed last year, I think just about everybody now admits, has a lack of clarity. It's ambiguous. I think even one of the DFL representatives, who happens to be a prosecutor, admitted during their hearing that it's confusing and needs clarification. So that's really the issue at hand here. How do we bring clarity to the law that was passed last year that allows school resource officers to keep our kids, our teachers, and schools safe? That's all we're trying to do.
You are the chief author of 4 bills on this issue. One simply repeals the changes that were enacted. 2 of the bills deal with exemptions then for various types of law enforcement. So law enforcement peace officers or school resource officers or officers who are contracted by the district. Essentially, only those law enforcement people would be used to use of force restraints, and everyone else is prohibited. Are there instances then when law enforcement must be able to utilize these restraints?
Yeah, without question. I think without question. And the reason, I still think a full repeal is the best option. I think we could all just click a reset button, erase what was passed, and start over. It doesn't mean that we have to end the conversation about school resource officers and how they should be acting safely in schools. But I think we owe it to school districts and students and communities right now a quick solution that they're asking for. That would be a repealer. And then we can have conversations about a few of the other bills that I dropped. And I did that to show people there are all sorts of different options and things that we could consider regarding this. So let's at least have the conversation. Let's do it transparently in front of the public and get feedback from stakeholders to make sure we get the best possible outcome. I think there are unfortunately incidences, and they're on the rise in schools right now, where students, teachers, staff are placed in danger. They're placed in harm's way, and those school resource officers have to have the authority and the discretion they need to prevent people from being harmed. That's really all we're talking about. And the law that was passed caused so much confusion that police officers and school districts and cities weren't sure, well, can we step in and stop this fight yet? Or do we have to wait for someone to get hurt or almost be hurt before we can actually intervene? That's what we need to stop and solve.
The 4th bill is broader. It continues to exempt school resource officers. It removes the word imminent from imminent bodily harm. It allows restraint to be used to prevent, quote, bodily harm or death to the child or another. And it requires the completion of a standardized school resource officer course of study. Does this represent fully the changes that you think are necessary if there is not a repeal?
So that bill is a step toward showing our colleagues across the aisle that we are very much open to a conversation, right? Let's allow police officers, school resource officers the discretion they need to keep people safe, but we're also open to having that conversation about other protocols or standards that we want to put in place regarding school resource officers and what they're able to do in schools or how we'd like them to be conducting themselves in our schools. It is not the goal of Republicans to just allow school resource officers to have a blank check in our schools to do whatever they want, nor do school resource officers want that. Nobody wants that. Our goal is to say, how do we ensure they're there to keep people safe, prevent and deter harm from happening, and then also, if there are concerns that we need to address regarding the community and other stakeholders, let's have that conversation. But let's do it as a group together in a way that's not going to have unintended consequences, like school resource officers being pulled out of buildings, which we had happen before the start of the school year.
Senator Bonnie Westland is the person carrying the bill that is currently moving in the Senate. That there was, a hearing in the Education Policy Committee last week, and there was some robust discussion on the bill. In what ways is Senator Westland's bill not satisfactory to you?
So in my opinion, and I think in the opinion of many others, there is, it doesn't solve some of the clarity issue that exists in the bill, meaning it's still, there's still room for improvement in allowing and making sure that it's very clear in the law that school resource officers have discretion. There's a couple of words in there. There's may versus shall. That needs to be addressed. Law enforcement, school resource officers need to be able to have the discretion to intervene, to stop, prevent, or deter people from being hurt. Right now that language is still in the bill. It needs to be fixed. There's also conversation regarding model policy and which groups of people will be involved in the process of shaping that policy. I think folks have concern about that. As a legislator, I do too. I don't think we should abdicate our responsibility as a state legislature. That's probably a decision that we should be making and crafting. Let's not pass the buck and put it to another group to decide. Let's do it right here, right now, so that people know what we're working on and law enforcement knows what they can expect regarding the law.
It must be noted that schools are not required to have school resource officers. In fact, a 2014 Department of Public Safety survey, which was then cited in a 2021 House Research memo, so because I know it's old, but at least in 2014, only 28% of Minnesota schools were served by school resource officers. Obviously, that may have changed by now. But what value do school resource officers bring to schools as a former school board member and somebody who's advocating about this?
Well, I appreciate what you said at the beginning of that question. I think there are really two things that we all need to remember as it relates to this issue. The first one is what you mentioned. Schools don't have to have school resource officers. So if there's truly an issue, a community, a school board, a school district could decide, hey, we're just not comfortable having school resource officers. Great, that's a decision that you can make at your level. We don't need to force everybody, all school districts across the state, to fit one universal mandate regarding school resource officers. Number two is this. The Minnesota Department of Education conducted a survey of Minnesota students. 94% of those who responded on the survey said they like and see value in having a school resource officer present in the building. So what's their value? It's invaluable. There's the safety component, there's the relationship building component, there's the first contact component. The school resource officers, the stories we hear from families, from students, from the districts, they would melt your heart. They are doing great work out there among youth, a lot of it under the radar that people don't know of, and for us to pass a law that has an unintended consequence that disrupts that is extremely damaging and something that it's our responsibility to correct and correct it immediately.
Education is very important to you, and so since I've got you here in the hot seat, I wanted to touch on one more topic. During the 2023 legislative session, you lobbied for legislation that would ensure that all Minnesota kids learn to read, following principles focused on the science of reading. The legislature did ultimately pass a measure called the READ Act, which will require schools to adopt a new reading curriculum. But you have dropped a bill that would amend the READ Act. What are you trying to amend? What would you like to see?
I appreciate the question. I think the good news is there was a bipartisan effort last year in regard to literacy efforts and the science of reading, and that being a part of the instruction in our schools. We're talking about phonics, sounding out words, as well as having that be a part of the instruction that future teachers would get or current teachers would get. Some of the aspects of the bill that maybe were a little bit out of our control were some of the mandated timelines and some of the mandates regarding curriculum. So what I would like to do, I think you are going to see a bill that's a revision to the READ Act. You might see a couple different versions, but really it's going to help school districts and either give them more time to adopt curriculum and or broaden the scope or the options that they can that would meet the definition of the curriculum that's allowed. Really, we're just trying to help schools implement this mandate so we can help as many kids as possible. That's the purpose behind it.
Senator Zach Duckworth, it is always a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.
Minnesota students shared their views and concerns with members of the Senate Education Policy Committee during a recent listening session.
I know personally I don't feel challenged in many of my classes, even though I take nearly every AP offered. And it makes me feel like much of the time that I'm even wasting my time being there in class. And I know many of my peers feel the same way.
One of the most commendable initiatives from the last legislative cycle that I wish to highlight is the investment in trades, specifically the establishment of a grant program enabling groups and schools to equip young people with the skills to construct housing, particularly for the economically disadvantaged.
Helping students with their mental health isn't the job of a teenager or even a teacher. This is the job of a trained professional who can give us what we truly need. Not only do our counselors help our mental health, but they are also perfect resources for our academic questions and success.
Just making sure that everyone feels safe coming to school, because there have been days that we don't, and there are days that a third of the class has been pulled out by their parents because they don't feel safe coming back.
An important thing that should be fixed in the education system is enacting school choice policies. A long-standing American tradition is a parent or guardian making the best decisions to raise their children in our ever-changing, expanding world.
We are told that providing students access to smartphones is synonymous with teaching them how to use these devices responsibly. However, our experiences contradict this assumption. Instead of enhancing our learning experiences, smartphones often serve as distractions, pulling our attention away from the valuable lessons being taught in the classroom.
Encouraging students to become involved in their community can also help them later in life as they will learn how to benefit their community and learn valuable social skills. This is why I believe that extracurricular leadership programs should become more widely available to students.
Over half of students have some form of anxiety and/or depression during their high school experience, and we need to take action. Just in the last 2 years, my school has faced more suicides than ever before, and this is a direct result from the increased academic stress that students face.
With such a diverse student body, it's important that our school calendars reflect that. When holidays are given off for Christian students but not for others, it appears as if one group of students' education is being prioritized over the other. As a Muslim student who observes the holiday Eid, I know firsthand the stress and anxiety that comes with taking off school for my holiday.
Thinking about the destruction that previous generations have caused, no offense, that my generation will have to live with is not only frustrating but scary. I'm 18 and this is the world that I have to grow up in.
My siblings are special education students, and I am worried for their time as they come up to high school. My high school is very loving to its normal-paced students, but I've noticed my special education workers are not as caring as they're supposed to be.
As a student board representative, my role is to represent students. However, at school board meetings, I only give a list of school events. I was not invited to policy meetings, which I believe a student voice would be imperative to increase student education. I was not given any professional development to be a student representative until this year by the MSBA, and often the role feels as if I'm just there to look pretty in a chair.
Senate photographers A.J. Olmscheid and Catherine J. Davis have captured the opening 2 weeks of the legislative session. Here's a look at some of their work. Join us again next week as we delve into more topics affecting Minnesotans. I'm Shannon Lurkey, and on behalf of all of us at Senate Media Services, thanks for watching.